录下看忘记。Sorry, I'm a little bit late. Is that what? Still fast.
You're on time.
Yeah, I'm on time. Okay, all right. Where's the pointer?
Right.
Okay, thank you. We're going to repeatedly talk about this empirical mode decomposition because it's one of the most important steps in the whole analysis of time frequency analysis, and it's actually the foundation of this HHT. So we're going to come back and talk about this, and I want everyone to get a deep appreciation of what this means. Why we want to do that? Because we want to define time scale or frequency, not the time scale frequency in the Fourier sense. I want to define time frequency as a function of time. And we want to also define energy density as a function of time. And not only that, we want to define the joint frequency and energy as a function of time. Okay. To do that, we need the AM and FM. We want the signal both to be amplitude and frequency modulated. Of course, all functions are amplitude and frequency modulated, but they are too complicated, too complex. So we want to have a amplitude and frequency modulated to be in this form. We want to write this function in this form. So amplitude define the local frequency, and the theta define local amplitude define the local energy, and frequency define the local frequency. So any function, if we can write in this form, then we call that expansion a generalized Fourier expansion. Then you may ask, Hilbert transformation can do that. Because you do the Hilbert transformation, you take the real and the imaginary component, and this is the modulus of the real and the imaginary component, and this is the arctangent, take a cosine function. That will be it. And I will show you why this is not working. Now, the question is, in order to do generalized Fourier expansion, under what condition can we write this function in this form, and it also make a physical sense, not just mathematical sense. Physical sense means we can define frequency unambiguously, define the frequency to be correct to the signal. So the Hilbert transformation offer a meaningful instantaneous frequency only if the function satisfies some condition. So complicated data, there should be more than one independent frequency. Okay, so decomposition has to be adaptive in order for us to study non-stationary nonlinear. So usually you take a data and take a Fourier transformation. That will give you information in terms of Fourier space or frequency space, and that you will totally lost the time domain. Why this is not enough? Why Hilbert transformation is not sufficient? Yeah, mathematicians told us that the Hilbert transformation exists for all functions of LP class. Why it doesn't work? Now, I want to show you the so-called envelope defined by Hilbert transformation does not make physical sense. Let's just look at these two very simple functions. The first function is sine with frequency of 16 hertz plus a small perturbation of 128 hertz. The other one is a very large high frequency component and a very small undulations. So this actually is just the switch of amplitude and frequency. It's two very, very simple functions. The first function is a low frequency plus a small high frequency modulation. What this function looks like? This function looks like this, right? A large function, which is 1/16, with 1/28 modulation on that. I want you to plot an envelope for this function. How are you going to plot it? So to define envelope is not trivial. How you define envelope for this function? You define envelope for this function in two ways to define. One way is that, all right, I'll follow the mathematician. I'll do a Hilbert transformation. If you do a Hilbert transformation and get the amplitude, you do a Hilbert transformation, this function looks like this. Yeah, very pretty patterns. Yeah, and each of these actually gives one of that loop. Why it give you that? Because each of this, you have the real part is increasing and decreasing. Yeah. So in this is the real axis. The real axis increasing and decreasing, increasing and decreasing. Each time you have an increasing, decreasing, you have a small loop. And when you have loop, when you define phase function, you take the derivative of phase function, you get negative values. Yeah. This is why we have to take it apart. So if you do not pay attention to that, you say, all right, this function looks innocent enough. One term, next term. This is a symmetric with respect to x. That also symmetric with respect to x. I will just do a Hilbert transformation. What will the Hilbert transformation give you? The amplitude looks like this. Yeah. So this, the red curve actually is the envelope defined by Hilbert transformation. Now, when we try to do the generalized Fourier transformation, we have an implicit assumption is that the frequency of amplitude should be lower than the carrier. But in this case, you can see that this amplitude has a very high frequency. Is this really an amplitude function? Yes, because nowhere will the data actually go beyond this curve. This curve is an upper bound. But this upper bound does not make a physical sense to us. The other way to do envelope is that you plot all the maximum point together. You connect this together. So this is connect all the maximum. That does not make too much sense either, because that envelope is almost like the data itself. It's just going with the data. So in this case, this is the data. This is one envelope defined by Fourier. This is one envelope defined by the connection of maxima. None of that makes sense. So none of the two envelopes seems to make sense in terms of generalized Fourier transformation. Yeah, we want to do generalized Fourier transformation. Write A as cosine theta. The Hilbert transformation oscillates too much, because Hilbert transformation always give you the high frequency, component. Later we'll talk about. And even though the Hilbert transformation exists, the simple Hilbert transformation does not give you physically meaningful amplitude, so that you can write as A cosine theta t. Yeah. For envelope to make sense, we have to reduce it down to IMF. The IMF is you go upper envelope, lower envelope, then you can come out this function and that function. So this function is IMF. This function is IMF as our introduction. So both are, once you go through that, you get this function, then the envelope starts to make sense. And indeed, this envelope gives you constant frequency as compared to the original data. it looks decent, except of course we have an effect. We'll come back to that. We can minimize that, not totally eliminate. And this is what's left. We have a little bit end effect, and you compare these two, you find that both of this it seems to be reasonable. So each of the MF, the envelope in terms of generalized Fourier transformation will make sense. For complicated data, we have to decompose it. So to be able to determine the envelope is equivalent to find the AM/FM oscillation. This particular example, the amplitude does not modulate. So let's look at the second example. The second example is that we have a very low amplitude, low frequency, and a large amplitude, high frequency. This frequency, when you plot it out, the function looks like that. It looks very well behaved. It just undulated slowly. If for this function, you want to find out its envelope, what's the envelope from Hilbert transformation versus envelope from the way that you connect maximums? The Hilbert transformation looks like that. This time, it does not loop around itself. The center is here. They're all turning around that. But when it's turned around, it's not a concentric circle. It sometimes go a little bit further on this way, sometimes go further another way. So this tends to repeat itself at the given periodicity. Okay. So what is the amplitude of this function? This is a real and imaginary. The modulus, you take the real part square plus the imaginary part square and take the square root. What's the envelope? The envelope look like that again. So Hilbert envelope always favor the higher frequency component. So this envelope, again, it's only touch the maximum point. So all the data are under the envelope. So the envelope still is by definition higher than all the data points. But this envelope, if I present this as an envelope, you'll see, well, that looks funny, right? Not only that looks funny, the envelope has a higher frequency oscillation than the carrier. In this case, if we connect all the maximum, it starts to make sense. So the envelope defined by all the maximum itself, it's not, it does not make sense all the time. In this case, it seems to be more reasonable than the Hilbert transformation. So the data is here, Hilbert transformation is the same, even though you swap the amplitude. The Hilbert transformation looks the same. Now, when Hilbert transformation looks the same, so even this well-behaved function, the amplitude for Hilbert transformation still does not serve as an envelope in terms of the generalized Fourier transformation. So Hilbert transformation always respect the higher frequency better. And for complicated function, we have to decompose it. And these two simple examples just illustrate to you, even if I have two simple sine functions, we cannot just do Hilbert transformation. We have to separate. And for more complicated function, of course, we need a more detailed decomposition. So mathematically, any function, if I give you a function, I say, well, decompose it, I will have infinite many ways to decompose it. I can use a Fourier decomposition. I can use any orthonormal function like a Legendre polynomial. And if not, I can even define the so-called empirical orthogonal function to decompose it. Yeah, empirical orthogonal function has many variations because it depends upon the core. So if I change the core, I have a different decomposition. Yeah, I can even define any empirical function as long as it's orthogonal. I can decompose the function. Yeah. So there are so many different ways to decompose a given function. Which one should we choose? Mathematically, they are all equivalent. So mathematicians say, well, any decomposition is valid because it satisfies the mathematical rules. For us, we have to choose the one that gives more physical insight. It's more significant. What's physical insight? It's hard to define mathematically. You have to get a function and find what's the physical meaning of the function. But a simple rule is that the fewer the number of representation components, the higher information contents it has. For example, if I give you a function of n point and you decompose it into Fourier, how many components you will give? You will get half n over 2 components. So that's a very large number. Yeah. So each of the sinusoidal function contains some information, but you add all together, it will come back to your original data. But if you, for example, in our introduction, we talk about the intrinsic mode function. The intrinsic mode function, the number is very low. How low it is? The intrinsic mode function, the number is as low as log 2 to the n. Yeah. If you have n component, n data points, you take log. That will be how many components. The maximum number of components you get is log 2 to the n. So because of that, the number of the component you get from the empirical mode decomposition is very low. And that is what the mathematician called sparse representation. Sparse representation means I have used very few components and I can get the same information. And that means each component has a lot of information. The information content is very high. I give you a Fourier decomposition, each one is sine wave. That information inside that sine wave is very low. As an example, I mentioned in my introduction, I give you a delta function. The delta function gives you white spectrum. I give you white noise, it gives you white spectrum. So you compare each of these components. The information is very low because if I want a delta function, how can the delta function be a sine? You have to add all the sign when the phase is right to get the delta function, near the delta function. So each component, it does not give you a lot of information. But if you do this EMD, you will have lots of information in it. But in order to get more information in each component, you cannot define the basis a priori. If you define the base a priori, usually you have to fit the basis. It almost like I don't know whether you know or not, making cookies. Do you know how to make cookies? You know what cookie is? 饼干, little 饼干. How to make a cookie of different shape? They have a mold. The mold cut into the dough. You roll the dough into a big piece, and then if you want to make a circular, you just cut out the circular, cut another circular, cut another circular, cut another. The circular cutter is exactly Fourier. Yeah. So you use Fourier to cut it. And mathematicians prove that if you just use one size Fourier, you can cut the whole piece and left nothing, because you can cut a big one, and then a smaller one, and an even smaller one, and even smaller one, and smaller. Eventually, use every piece of the dough. That means completeness. So you use up all the dough. Yeah. So using a fixed a priori base means you have one size, one shape of the cutter. Yeah. Because you have one shape cutter, you have to use a big one, a smaller one, and then eventually very, very small. But use adaptive, you don't have to do that. You can look at the dough, the shape of the dough. For example, the shape of the dough looks like this. Then you have to use one big and another one to cover a lot of space. But use adaptive. You can say, well, I'll just cut over there. I get two pieces. And okay. So, but adaptive has to satisfy certain condition, and that's what we are doing in this class. We want to cut the data into little pieces. There are many, many different ways that you can cut. The philosophy of empirical mode decomposition is that I will not use one size, one shape cookie cutter. I would look at the dough. I would select my shape according to the size of the dough. Yeah. And that's why you can, instead of log 2 to the n, you can actually, instead of n or order of n, you can get the log of that. So the empirical mode decomposition is an adaptive way to generate this, these functions. Now, we have already explained this before, but I will revisit this and I will emphasize the mathematical background of this decomposition. We come back again to this data. Here is 0. Yeah. And we know we can write Hilbert. We know that the Hilbert representation does not make sense. We have already proved that. So what we did was actually go through the upper and lower envelope. And upper and lower envelope, we can move this wave up, that wave down, all the way to the central line. That's our idea. The idea is, in this case, we don't care about the size of the cookie cutter. The cookie cutter has to be simply connected. Okay, the cookie cutter cannot have a concave shape. So we move this wave up and down, and this is not satisfactory. We just keep on doing this until we got the final shape. When we get that final shape, we have to realize, what is this? Yeah, this actually, if you look carefully, the x minus m1 equal to h1. h1 and minus m2 equal to h2. So h2 equals x minus m1 plus m2. So the differences, the means, was summed. And if we keep on doing this until to the case, that means x minus m1 minus m2 and minus m3 minus m4. So it's x minus the summation of all the m's. Each m is a spline. It's not only a spline, it's average of upper and lower spline, right? The mean. So you have to realize that by the time we get hk is the difference between your function and a sum of the spline functions. So spline function is very important in our operation. If we change the spline, we change the result. Yeah. And later, next time, I'll come back to explain to you why we select cubic spline. Yeah. Because cubic spline guarantee maximum smoothness. So HK equals to C1. Then this looks C1, and C1 has a very good Hilbert transformation. So because then we can write as amplitude and the phase, FM, AM, and it's each extrema correspond to a zero crossing. So that's the final result. And this final result, then you look, is it x minus C1 equal to R1. R1 minus C2 equal to R2. You keep on doing this and then sum it up. X minus summation Cj equal to Rn, the last component, residual. So this is our final result. Final result is x is expressed in terms of Cj. We have looked C1. C1 is the data minus sum of all the spline mean. X minus C1 equal to R1. So C1 equal to this. So R1, what is R1? So R1 equals the sum of that. So X minus R1, X minus R1 equal to C1. You can change this, right? C1 equal to X minus that. So our R, the residual, is already a sum of all the envelope sum of the spline function. Because of that, then we can see R1 minus C2 equals R2. So C2 equals R1 minus R2. So R2 is the sum of the second level of spline. So C2 equals to first order of residual minus second order residual. Yeah. So because of that, all the functions that we generate are actually constituted by different order of splines. So the so-called intrinsic mode function is nothing but the summation of splines. Because the spline is very smooth, so all our components are very smooth. Yeah. The spline that we choose is the cubic spline. It's continuous in the data, continuous in slope, continuous in curvature. Continuous in data, first derivative and second derivative. They're all continuous. So this function is a very smooth function. It's continuous slope, continuous in curvature. Yeah. And if we change the spline method, this form of the function changed. Yeah. So our method depends critically on the spline function that we use. And each function is actually spline. Now because of that, we can see that x equal to summation of Cj. So x1 equal to C1 equals to x minus the first order. C2 equals to the first R1 minus R2. Then C3 equals to R2 minus R3. So you compare, this is R1, this is R1. It's negative and positive, they cancel. As you keep adding this until the end, so they're all canceled. So when you do summation of Cj, come back to x. This is provide that you absorb the last residual into your function as a component. Yeah. So in this way, we prove that even though each component is the sum of spline function, you add up the spline function, you come back to the original data. That is given. So the completeness of the decomposition is given. What is completeness? Complete means I take a data, I decompose into the component. The component can come arbitrarily close to your original data. There's no error in that. We use up the whole data completely without anything left. Yeah. This decomposition satisfies that by construction. Yeah. So all IMF are sum of spline functions. So we will come back to talk about the spline functions. Spline functions very important. We select the cubic natural spline to maintain the maximum smoothness. We'll discuss this spline function next time. We'll do it very detailed. This, as I said in the introduction, is original data. This is the R1, is the first round of the mean that I got. The first round of the mean bisects every little change in wave as well as in even in curvature. Yeah. Even though I did not enforce curvature, but it actually even take care of the inflection point if you do it many, many times. This is amazing that by just looking at maximum minimum and using curvilinear, you can take care of many of these inflection point, but not all. You can take many of the gentle ones. The more, not the gentle ones, you can take the more abrupt ones. This compare, this is the first residual, this is the last residual. In between this, you keep adding M2, M3, M4, M5. This, each of the M push this curve further down here, and finally you get that the last residual. Yeah. So this is the essence of the operation. You have to remember the operation is that I will use this maximum, minimum, and envelope, and each envelope is a spline function. So every component I got is a spline function. So other than the first component, which is delta minus the first spline, all the functions are very smooth. Yeah. So the smooth function, we can take a derivative, we can define frequency, and define it well. And actually, if you decompose the original data, you get this component. And it becomes more and more flat, eventually it becomes almost constant. Yeah. And once you get that, you can write this function as A, E, I, omega t. And I want to find out the equivalent of frequency. I don't have to go through this. I just say I define frequency as time derivative of the phase. And that is the classical wave theory. But what we're doing here is that I ask, if I ask A, E, I, omega t, E, I, theta, and I do a Fourier transformation of I minus I, omega t, I want to find out what is the maximum contribution to this W of omega. This integral has a theory called the Riemann-Labèque lemma. Riemann-Labèque lemma means that any continuous function f of t times e I lambda t dt integral, this will be 0 when limit lambda approach to infinity. If lambda is very large, this integral is 0. That means you have any function, continuous function. If I multiply by a sine wave, and the sine wave frequency is high enough, then you have positive, negative, will cancel out. This will be 0. So what will be left after your operation? What's left of the operation is whenever this function has a phase which is stationary. more stationary. And that part will not cancel out. So that's the basic method of stationary phase. If you are interested in stationary phase, you can look at some of the books called Asymptotic Expansion, like Erdely's book or Copson's book. Stationary phase is a very common method in asymptotic expansion. So for this to be stationary, the derivative has to be 0. You take a derivative to 0, means time derivative of phase minus omega equal to 0. And that's why we define d theta dt as our frequency. D theta of dt as frequency is exactly what the classical wave theory used. And here we use it, we prove it further by the stationary phase approximation. There are many, many different ways to define frequency. Later, when we talk about the frequency, we will revisit this. Frequency, the first way to define frequency is Fourier. You have any function, you take a Fourier transformation, you get a function of frequency. That's Fourier way of defining frequency. And you can use wavelet analysis to define frequency. Most people, most wavelet analysis people don't want to code their result, don't want to represent their result in terms of frequency. They want to represent their result into scales. But that scale actually is frequency. Yeah. If you use the wavelet analysis package that we give you, and that's expressed in terms of frequency. Wigner-Weil give you frequency. Yeah. And then dynamic system using Hamiltonian give you frequency. Dynamic system means I can write the system into generalized momentum and generalized coordinate and the time. So then you define action as generalized generalized momentum integrate with generalized coordinate. Integrate with one total cycle. You have to integrate one cycle. Then you get amplitude. Action. So partial derivative of h with a give you frequency. That frequency, again, represents an integral quantity, even though it's a function of time. But because amplitude is defined by integral, so this is defined integral. Tigger's energy operator, a period between zero crossing and always. So there are all different ways to define frequencies. And when we come back to define instantaneous frequency further, we will discuss every one of this method, and you can compare this result with the method. And our way is the HHT way. We are looking for an analytic function through Hilbert transformation, or we can use quadrature. We'll talk about later. So why we want to do shifting? I repeat, the shifting is to eliminate the riding wave. We do not want to have a wave in between zero crossing has two maximums, or multiple maximum or multiple minimum. So shifting can eliminate that. And shifting is also to make this envelope symmetric. We make so that we make the function satisfy the necessary condition for Hilbert transformation to be to give you positive frequency. But positive frequency alone is not enough. We will see later. Now, as we say, theta, how we define theta? Theta is the Hilbert transformation over the real value. Arctangent to y over x. X is the real number. Y is the Hilbert transformation. So arctangent is give you theta. So this is our definition of theta. So the frequency is taken by time derivative of theta. So what are the problems that we're going to have with the theta derivative? So you take the derivative, you take the time derivative of this arctangent, you put arctangent in, you finally get this form. So you can see this form is interesting. X can be 0. That means the real value can be 0, no problem. Yeah, it can be 0. Omega can still be a very good value, well-behaved value. Y can be 0. The imaginary part can be 0. That's no problem. But what you will have problem is the amplitude is 0. Whenever amplitude becomes 0, this becomes singular. So omega becomes singular. So beware of the point when amplitude is 0. So how can amplitude be 0? There are cases when amplitude will be 0. So when amplitude becomes 0, IF becomes singular. At that point, we cannot define omega. Yeah. These are all the problems that we had with this new method. And I want to let you know that. And again, when we do decomposition, we have a problem, say, when to stop. This decomposition can keep going on and on and on. Yeah. In this, we have to limit the maximum number of decomposition. This now is not a critical parameters that we have to observe. But when we develop the method, this becomes very, very important for us practically. Because we've been trying all kinds of spline. Some spline function does not converge. So when we put in computer, we didn't know what will come out. It will run day and night for 2 days and still does not stop. At that time, of course, our computer is much, much slower. You've never used such a slow computer. You heard the computer 286, 386. Those are the days that when we developed the method. Yeah. So when people say that this method has a limitation, I'm always surprised because when I use 286 to develop the method, I find the limitations everywhere. If I put 1,000 data points in there, I have to wait for maybe half hour before I get answer. 1,000 points. See, now, I think 10,000 points you can do it like that. Most of the computer. But that's very different. Yeah. Another way is the stoppage criteria. There are many different stoppage criteria. We'll talk about that when we come to the stoppage criteria. But in order for you to get into a good habit to use EMD, you should always record what you got. You recorded, I use envelope, extrema, the maximum shifting number, and the stoppage criteria. You record that so that you can come back and redo it. You can come to get the same result. Otherwise, you may not get the same result because if you do it just once, or I do it 10 times, I do it 100 times, I do it 1,000 times, they are all slightly different because the approximation. Remember the this is the first time I try. The first time I try looks pretty good, but it's not good enough. So I tried repeatedly for 14 times. I eventually get that. So using this as the final mean and using this as final mean, of course you get different answers. Yeah, and in between you get 14 different answers. So which one that you got, you have to record it. It says I used the stoppage criteria of, say, the first time, or I used the criteria the second time, the third time. So all that you have to record in your computation. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for you to come back to where where you got, where you started. The stoppage criteria that we use are very different people using different method. In our original development, we use this. This means that I can do it the k minus 1 times, and then compare the k's times. If the difference of the two is very small relative to the function, I stop. Yeah, this is a Cauchy type of convergence criteria. So this is what we use at the very beginning. Later, this becomes very popular, and mathematicians like this method the best. That is, I will limit the iteration, the number of iteration. I will do it 10 times, stop. I always use 10 times. Whether it's the difference small or big, I don't care. Yeah. If you compare, you will find this difference is not monotonically decreasing. It's decreasing a little bit, increase and decrease, increase, decrease, increase. Yeah. Do they all have the shifting tool? Yes. Huh? Do you all have the algorithm to do the shifting? EMD. Do they have EMD tools? Have you ever tried EMD? Any of the students? You have ever tried? No. Anybody has not tried? Please show their hand. Anybody didn't try EMD? Show their hand. So everybody tried. I did this experiment every time. I always success. So you have tried, right? Huh? Have you tried EMD? You did. Did you or didn't you? 你试过没有? Listen, you don't understand what I'm talking, right? 你不懂我讲话哈? You have to express. But my colleague in Tokyo, have you ever tried empirical mode decomposition?
No.
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 So okay, all right. Then I will hold back the homework assignment. The homework assignment will ask you to use this, but later we'll do that. Okay. At the beginning, we plot this SD. We found SD actually moves like this. It's not monotonically decreasing. It's SD actually decrease, increase, decrease, increase, decrease. It goes like that. Why it has this up and down? It's when one of the inflection point becomes a wave, it suddenly jump up, and then it decrease, and then another inflection point get decomposed out as a component. So this way, there's no guarantee that you always end up here. You may end up there and may end up anywhere. So the fixed number of spline means I don't care. After 10 times, this is n. After 10 times, I stop, no matter where. Okay. I will later when we show the stopping criteria, we will discuss that. The third method is to have the mean very close to 0. That is for this to be small everywhere. This was used by Patrick Flandre, for the mean to be very small. And the last one is this. See, none of this guarantee that the final component is a intrinsic mode function. This one guarantees it's the intrinsic mode function. How it guarantees that? It guarantees, says, define S as a consecutive number of shifting in which the zero crossing and the extrema are the same. So you shift it once, you count how many extrema and how many zero crossing. If they're equal, you say, all right, first. So S equal to 1. So if you say S equal to 2, the 2 times you shift once and shift another time. The nth n plus 1th time. The number of zero crossing and the extrema has to equal. Not only has to equal the same number. Like I have 10 zero crossing and 10 extrema. The next time I shift also 10, then I stop. That means S equal to 2. If X equal to 3 or 4, that means 4 consecutive times the zero crossing and the extrema has to be equal. Yeah, that's the way to examine the number of extrema and the zero crossing. But that did not examine the whether the mean is flat or not. So none of the method actually give all the check everything. Yeah. Another flaw of this that people think that the stoppage criteria is hard to define is that all of these are global properties. You look at the whole data set, how many zero crossings compared to how many extremas. Yeah. How about this only happen in one local area, which is flawed, and the other area are fine. So all this stoppage criteria has been used. Yeah. Every method gives you slightly different answer, but when you project in time frequency domain, you will not able to find actually the difference. Yeah. So most of this give you comparable results. Another shifting that we have designed, but people seldom use it, is curvature shifting. The curvature shifting is this. Instead of looking at the maximum, you take a second derivative. Then you look at the curvature to look at the maximum of the curvature to implement your shifting. This is the present shifting is based on extrema. Is x derivative equal to 0. You will look at for the maximum, minimum, maximum, minimum. Each extrema, the derivative for x equal to 0. Now they are scales where x second derivative equals 0, x third derivative equals 0. Each one can give you a scale. Why we use x prime equal to 0? So in order to define scale, I can define scale by maximum, minimum, the distance between maximum and minimum. Maximum derivative equals 0, minimum derivative also equals to 0. But by Taylor series expansion, you can do x equal to 0, x double prime equals 0, x cubic prime equals 0, and you can keep on going. There's no stop. Like inflection point, each inflection point is second derivative equal to 0. Yeah. So all of this give you different time scales. Now, which one, where should we stop? If you want to find the hidden scale, you can keep on going higher and higher derivative. And Eventually, it may actually stop. It may even not stop. It take derivative all the way. But each derivative means that your local region get expanded. First derivative take 2 points. Second derivative take 3 points. Fourth derivative, third derivative take 4 points. And eventually it can nth derivative get n plus 1 points. Yeah, n plus 1 points is not local anymore. Yeah. So when should we stop? This is one question that we have to discuss. So I use a very simple way to define the stop. I use the simple way is that I say that I would never go beyond second derivative, because based on the background of Newtonian mechanics, what are the important parameters? Position, velocity, acceleration. If your data is position, your first derivative is velocity, the second derivative is acceleration. Acceleration, beyond acceleration, is no physical meaning in terms of mechanics. Mechanics is expressed in terms of F equal to ma, or time derivative of the velocity. So I think the second derivative is the maximum we can go. And to calculate the curvature takes the second derivative. So you can calculate the curvature and use the curvature to maximum curvature to do decomposition. This is very detailed already, but I usually advise against using this, because if your data is noisy, you take a second derivative, the noise will dominate, right? Each little noise, take a derivative becomes positive, negative. The second derivative's noise becomes very high. Another thing is the second derivative. You have a problem. When you use, if you decide to use curvature, you have to be careful what you're asking for. Even when the wave has slight deformation, like in Duffing wave, second curvature derivative will take it to it, the harmonics out, will actually give you 2 components. So second derivative, Duffing pendulum will give you more than 1 component, and that's very hard. So therefore, using curvature decomposition, you have to be very careful. I use it a few times when the hidden scale, there are lots of hidden scale, but most of the time, I only use it to get rid of noise. It's very effective. You take curvature derivative once and throw away the first components. Then you come back, the data is much smoother. Yeah. Well, after you throw away the first components, you come back using the data. There's a third, another complication. That's intermittency. Intermittency occurs in nature very often. The first time people observe intermittency was by Osborne Reynolds. When Osborne Reynolds tried to study turbulence, he let a flow, a lambda flow, going through a tube and start to oscillate the oscillation, and eventually it becomes unstable. That's turbulence. Turbulence does not occur, sometimes does not occur all the time. It occurs some of the times. Yeah. And it may occur here and then stop, and occur again and stop. This is called intermittency. If you use the data looks like this, it's very smooth, and suddenly have a small oscillation, and it goes smooth, and another oscillation, and so on. This presents a problem in decomposition. Why? Because if we plot maximum, and we come at the maximum all here, and then come to the maximum over here. Then we'll follow all the maximum and then jump to this maximum. Maximum seems to be all right. When you plot minimum, and then this minimum will come up here and then come down. So when you do straightforward decomposition, you will get all the high frequency out. But this large wave get pushed down here. So instead of getting a small component, large component, you get all kinds of fragmented waves. A large wave mixed with high frequency small wave is what we call the mode mixing. Mode mixing is not physical. Well, you can ask me, you just said that the Osmerinos look at the initiation of turbulence. You have calm and turbulence, calm and turbulence. True. Natural phenomena is calm and turbulence. Calm and turbulence is called the intermittency. The reason it's called the intermittency is because in the turbulence regime and the calm regime, the physics is very different. Calm regime is laminar flow, turbulence is unstable. So this whole phenomenon contains two states of phenomena. So how can you actually separate this from that? The small, you separate all the higher frequency to the lower frequency. That is a problem that's facing us. And we have many other methods that we can do this. But first, I will present to you the way to avoid this is what we call the mode mixing. We want to avoid that. At the beginning, at the development of the method, I thought the mode mixing is not a problem. I thought that, sure, you pick up the higher one, then the lower frequency gets pushed down. So when I project it back to time frequency, this lower frequency will reappear. I did not think that was a problem. But when I do this in detail, I find that this creates a lot of problem in our data analysis. This is the straightforward decomposition. This is what we call the intermittency test. Let me first show you the result. If we compute instantaneous frequency for this side, what we will have is that we do have the higher frequency components. And lower frequency, there are many different lower frequencies. By and large, lower frequencies all sit over here. So the result we get is high frequency and low frequency. It's separate, still separate out. But you compare to the clean higher frequency, low frequency, you actually get a higher frequency and very clean low frequency. Yeah, that's the difference. Compare this result with that result. When you look, the visual inspection gives you a very fuzzy representation of low frequency component over here. And if you do marginal spectrum, if you look at the detail, instead of a constant frequency, this frequency scattered all over the place. Yeah. And if you integrate all the frequency to the marginal frequency, you find, if I use Fourier, I have a low frequency and high frequency. If you use the clean one, I have a low frequency and higher frequency. If you use the unclean one, you get low frequency and higher frequency. Yeah. So how you compare these two, these three methods? If we look at the higher frequency first, the marginal spectrum looks like the Hilbert with intermittency and the Fourier. They're almost the same, but the one that with mode mixing, even the peak is off. And you look at the higher frequency. The higher frequency, both with and without intermittency, give a very well defined peak as compared to the Fourier. The Fourier cannot handle anything that's intermittent. You have a signal here and stop, have another signal section of signal. Then the Fourier, because it's continuous, so you have to take a wave continuous from beginning to end. So instead of this peak, you have to add many, many peaks to cancel out somewhere in between. In other words, if you have this kind of wave, Fourier cannot handle because Fourier give you continuous wave. And in order for the continuous wave to represent that, you have to add other components to cancel this out to leave only components over there. So Fourier handled the higher frequency very poorly. Yeah. Now, what is the intermittency test that we'll talk about? The intermittency test that we'll talk about is this. Now, when you do decomposition, instead of you add one statement, you say that if the peak distance from the peak is larger than a pre-assigned number, here I pre-assign 8. If it's larger than 8, I will ignore the wave. So you come down to the data. If the data spacing is larger than 8, these two spacing of extrema is larger than 8, I ignore this. I say, well, this I will not take. When you come down to here, this wave to the next wave is smaller than 8, then we'll count the maximum. I will count the maximum. So I only count the maximum here. I only count the maximum here. I only count the maximum. All the other maximum are 0. And as a result, there's no maximum until you have maximum. This satisfies the space of the maximum smaller than certain number. Yeah. So in this way, you can pick out all the large numbers and the higher frequency wave and leave the lower frequency intact. And when you do that, you actually get a lower frequency spectrum which has a dynamic range of almost 5 decades. This -10, -5. Yeah, I staggered this already. You look at this. This is almost only 2 decades. So Fourier representation gives you only 2 decades of resolution, but Hilbert gives you 5 decades of resolution. So if you do the problem right, it actually gives you the answer much better. So this is called intermittency. When you do intermittency, you have to remember which criteria you use. I use first 8, then I use the second 8. Like, for example, like in this particular case, I used 8 2 times. Yeah, so you have to record that. So the next time you can come back and you would be able to reproduce the result. Yeah. The mathematical requirement for basis is for convergence, completeness, orthogonal, and uniqueness. These are the universal requirement for basis. Yeah. Now, for the EMD basis, let's check whether we satisfy this condition. The condition, first convergence. Convergence means given epsilon, there exists n, such that the nth envelope, the mean is less than epsilon everywhere. This is a mathematical statement. That means no matter how small epsilon you choose, for example, I wanted the mean to be small. How small is small? 10 to the minus 6. All right, you choose 10 to the minus 6. Then there is a large n, so you can choose. You can split maybe shift 1 million times, they'll make that small. That means this envelope mean was smaller than epsilon everywhere. That means converged. As long as this n is finite. If n is infinite, then it means not converging. Can we prove this? No. I cannot prove this method converge mathematically. But empirically, I've never found a decomposition that I will take infinite many times, unless you use strange splines. I will warn you, don't use strange splines. If you use, for example, higher order spline, sometimes does not converge. Yeah, because higher order spline introduce additional scales. We will talk about that later. So this is the mathematical statement I put for mathematicians for them to prove. And so far, nobody picked it up. Nobody know how to prove it. Another convergence problem is that this is all stoppage criteria. I can choose up epsilon. There are always a large number n, so that after the n shifting, the difference of this will be small. So the statement is, given epsilon there exists n, such that the difference between the nth and the n minus 1 times trial is good. The difference is small everywhere. Yeah, that is another convergent statement mathematically. I put this up for mathematicians. Nobody picked it up on this. So the complete proof of convergence is really it's not being established. In very simple case, we can prove the convergence. Not convergence, deconvergence. So certain spline, it will not really convergence. We can only satisfy this by empirical method. Right now, for applications, we only satisfy the convergent proof empirically. This means you take the data, I put in this algorithm, the algorithm never fail. As long as you use maximum smoothed spline, like a cubic spline. The necessary condition for convergence is the mean line should be less, should have less extrema than the original data. In other words, if you want the method to converge, the mean should not have the same number of extrema as your original data. So the mean should be smoother than the original. If you can achieve that, it will be fine. But if mean is as rough as your original data, then you will have a problem. Yeah. When I first developed this method, certain people suggest to me that why you have to go to maximum and minimum? Why don't you just use the midpoint? Yeah. If you use midpoint, then you save. You have only do one spline rather than two spline average. And turns out the midpoint will not converge. We tried. Midpoint spline does not guarantee convergence, and that we can prove. The next one is completeness. Completeness is given in our decomposition. Completeness means that we can get as close to the original data as you want. Mathematically speaking, is that x equal to exactly the summation of Cj. Algebraically satisfied. There's no error in that. So completeness is given by construction. Yeah. Orthogonality. In most of the decomposition, mathematically, they require orthogonal. Orthogonal is a very good property, but it has a limitation. the orthogonal usually only only work for linear system. Nonlinear system is never orthogonal. Yeah, nonlinear system can have non-orthogonality. So linear decomposition orthogonality is required. What is orthogonality? Orthogonality means x dot y inner product equal to 0. It's two orthogonal. Inner product means x1 plus y1, x2 plus y2, and so on and so forth equal to 0. That's orthogonality. Now, in our case, we want to have a summation of Cj. X equals summation of Cj. So x squared equals summation of Cj squared plus Ci times Cj when I does not equal to j. Right? When you multiply, you multiply this, you get the square and then the cross terms. Yeah. If this term is not equal to 0, then we have problem. That means it's not orthogonal. Yeah. And this can be negative. This can be negative, and so make the energy even smaller than the component add. So this term equal to 0 means orthogonal. Why our decomposition almost always satisfy orthogonality? It's because of the decomposition. We use, this is called Reynolds decomposition. Reynolds decomposition means that x equal to average, the velocity equal to average velocity plus a deviation. Then the average and deviation, they are always orthogonal. Why? Because if you write x equal to mean plus deviation, then this deviation, average of deviation has to be 0. Because if I take average both sides, this average equal to that average equal to that average. Average is still average. Then this, so average equal to average, so this has to be 0. This average of that has to be 0, right? So then the orthogonality between these two terms means u mean dot u prime equal to 0. Why? Because this inner product average means this average of average is still average dot this average. This average is 0. So it's 0. So the orthogonality is proved because of Reynolds decomposition. Why our decomposition is Reynolds type? Our envelope is always mean. The component that we get out is always locally deviation. So local deviation, difference of local deviation with local mean are orthogonal based on Reynolds decomposition. So the orthogonality is based on this physical property or mathematical property. But when you have a poor decomposition, the orthogonality is not always guaranteed. So what I will do is I will always check the orthogonality index. The orthogonality index is defined by Ci times Cj when I does not equal to j divided by Ci squared plus Cj squared. That's the orthogonality index between I and j. And the orthogonality index for the whole set means the summation of all that compared with my data. Yeah. So you can always check this. Data like this decomposed, you see pairwise, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. They're all very, very small. And all the sum of all of this I equal not equal to j is 4%. Yeah. So the orthogonality is almost always satisfied. Uniqueness. Using different critical parameters like stoppage criteria, like different spline, you may get different IMF. In fact, by play this, you can get infinite many numbers of IMFs. The result is only unique only with respect to the parameters that you choose. This is not surprising. For example, Fourier analysis is unique. But if I do a Fourier spectrum, depends upon the window size you use. If I use different window size, will give different spectrums, right? So it's the same thing here. The present shifting is based on cubic spline. So if you use different spline, you will get a different answer. But the answer is, the difference is very small. We did try different splines, and we did not find very different result. And the best way for us is to choose not just one set of parameters. If you say stoppage criteria, I just choose epsilon equal to 0.1, or you choose the S number equal to 3. After you finished, is how do you know this is right? I will try S equal to number 2. I'll try S equal to 5. You try an ensemble of that, you compare. You see whether they're close or not. If they are close enough, they give you confidence limit. So the answer you got, not only you get the answer, you get it how confident you are with the answers. We'll talk about that. So the decomposition, once you come to a adaptive method, you have to be very, very careful so that to make sure that the answer make physical sense, the answer make mathematical sense as well. You have to establish how confident you are with respect to the answer. Now, there are some little tricks in shifting, but that's really when we now have this ensemble EMD, you have no problem. So I will not get involved in this small trick. Actually, the trick is to add a little bit noise, low-level noise. Low-level noise, you can use intermittency, you add low-level noise. Now we not only add low-level noise, we can add finite amount of noise. We still get the answers. So those are all the methods that you can select and to get better EMD EMD results. Yeah. So I will stop here. I will ask if you have any questions. Our colleague in Tokyo, do you have any questions? Do you have any questions here? 有没有问题？
关掉了，我就用中文问。就是这个。
The Chinese question later. The class is still going on. We have to. Can you translate in English?
Yes, I have a question about the Hilbert envelope. The red line you showed.
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the red line is the amplitude of
Yes.
the two sine waves
Right.
together.
Right.
You said it's the envelope, but I think it's the amplitude. If you combine the two sine waves together into one wave form,
Yeah.
the amplitude should be sine like
Right.
wave.
Right. This is exact here. So what happened is that you using Hilbert. I define the envelope here as Hilbert. Is that when you do Hilbert, you have x plus y. Right? This x is your real. Y is the imaginary part. If this is sine, this is cosine. So add together is the envelope. Okay. So in this way, then x plus iy. So x squared plus y squared square root is my amplitude t. So after Hilbert, these two, a imaginary analytical pair can be written as AT EI theta T. I call this envelope.
But your envelope, the other line, I think it's not the same meaning as the red line because your envelope, in fact, your envelope, upper envelope minus lower envelope is the same meaning as the red line.
You talk about different. Upper envelope you talk about this, lower envelope you talk about different.
Yes.
Yeah, so these are different way. This is zeta. This is using maximum, local maximum to define envelope. This is using Hilbert to define envelope. They are different. So the question I ask here is that if I give you data, any data, how you define envelope? Many people think Hilbert give me envelope. So I present Hilbert envelope. But the other people say, no, you shouldn't use Hilbert envelope. You use maximum connection as upper envelope. Yeah, but this is a very simple problem. If I give you a complex problem, so your envelope actually becomes your data itself. Yeah, so that does not give you, that's very different from the impression. The impression you get is the envelope should be this, right? But the envelope should not be a wavy line. So that's what I'll try to illustrate with this example. If you go a different way, see like this, then this doesn't change. Because it's still, as you say, it's the amplitude the square. It's x squared plus y squared. Yeah. So then in this case, this envelope seems to make more sense. So if you look at the book, a statistical book that define envelope, they have a very hard time to define envelope, especially in this case. This is not a very good envelope. This is not a very good envelope. This is not a very good envelope. So I think the envelope only has a very good meaning when it's IMF. This envelope that I'm talking about is in terms of generalized Fourier. I want to write something as AT cosine theta T. Yeah. All right. If my our colleague in Tokyo has no question, then the class will be dismissed. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Okay, now the class is over. You can ask. 他们现在已经不播了吧？断了吗？断了。Okay. So now we can you can use Chinese. 你们还有问题吗？我是讲，就是说你在这个去找这个包罗线啊，这包罗线这条对还是这条对，还是一条直线对？呀，这个没有定论的，在这个统计的书里面没有定论。
我的意思是说，它那个红线实际上它是整幅，就是这两个加起来。
对，那么假如在 Hilbert transformation， 因为我可以写成这样的，我可以写成 AEI theta T。这个是 envelope， 这个是 carrier， 这个是从数学上是这样的，所以这个是一个 possible envelope。我并不是说这个是对的。OK， 还有没有问题？ Zero crossing 是过跨零点，对，在零点的地方，零点。这个跨零点就是这一点。
他为什么想要用它？就是为什么人家会想要用它？
period 对吧？跨零点是一个 wave， 这个是一个 wave， 这是一个 wave。那个跨零点是一个很正常的。 我讲画一个简单的 wave 啊，这跨零点呢、是一个很正常的方法去 define 这个 wavelength， 对不对？因为 wavelength 的 definition 是什么？是一个 phase 到同一个 phase， 对不对？零点是不是一个 phase？ 是啊，所以这个零点这个 phase 到这个是一个很正常的 method。那么当然这个是有下跨零点、上跨零点，下跨零点对下跨零点，这是一个 wave， 这是很 normal 的。或者你可以用这个 extrema 到 extrema， 但是统计的人都不敢用 extrema。为什么不敢用 extrema 呢？因为 extrema， 假如用这个 Gaussian 来说的 extrema， 在一个 broadband 里面 extrema number 是无穷大的。因为什么呢？因为你看啊，我假如找跨零点的话，我这跨零点指这一点，我要找 extrema 是什么？这里，所以 extrema expected number of extrema for Gaussian process 的话是谱的4次方，就是 m4 over m0的这个是 extrema number 的那个expected number， 4次方谱的4次方，我假如一个谱 omega 4次方积分 d omega， 这个等于 m4 啊，这个谱假如它的 decay 是低于4的话，这个就变得无穷大了，这个积分不存在，所以没有人敢用 extrema 去 define wave number， 大家都用跨零点，跨零点是m2 over m0， 这个是 m4 over m2， 我记不大清楚了，这是 m2 2次方2维的比较容易呀，所以大家都用跨零点而不用 extrema。 用 extrema 另外一个问题就是说，我在这里 extrema 在这里是一个 wave 是很好的，对不对？我到这里来呢，我这个 wave 就从这里到这里是一个 wave， 到这里是一个 wave， 然后到这里一个 wave， 到这里 wave， 到这里 wave。那么你说好，我的 wavelength 是这个，那我这个大 wave 就不见了，对不对？你数都数的高频的，数不到低频的。
那我 zero crossing 不就高频的用？
zero crossing 数低频的，对吧 ？extrema 数高频的，因为高频的 number 非常多，所以高频常常数不完，数不清楚。在理论上是数不清楚的，实际上我们一定可以数清楚的，因为你数据是 finite 嘛，我一定可以数嘛。你一共只有 n 个点，你不用每个都是 extrema 我都可以数清楚，怎么会数不清楚呢？对不对？但是你要把它写成数学公式，就不存在。所以过去人家去 estimate 跨零点，因为要找4次方，4次方差不多的 spectrum 都不 converge。像 turbulence 的 spectrum 最后的那个斜率是 -5 乘了一个4，就1 over omega，1 omega 积分是 log， 所以你这个 omega 无穷大 ，log 无穷大也是无穷大，所以就跨零那个 extrema 就变成无穷大了。所以人家说啊，这个不合理的，这个是数学的表示方法啊。你实际的数据拿来，我怎么会是无穷大呢？你一共给我你无穷大的数据没有的，对不对？给我的数据都是 finite， 我一定可以数出来。OK， 好，你们讲没有问题的，我有一个 suggestion 啊。我知道这个早上起来是很困难的啊，大家有的时候会打瞌睡啊，所以有一个 good suggestion 啊 ，for those people 啊，就是这些人要打瞌睡的人啊 ，find something good to do， 找一些事情你可以做的，比如说记笔记，或者是不记笔记，在那个笔记本上画图，都可以使你不睡觉哈。上课睡觉，这个，那你不如干脆不来了。就在家里面睡好了再来啊，不困的时候来上课，困的时候不要来上课，因为什么？这困的时候上课影响我，因为我一看人家睡觉了，我就很紧张了。我想是不是我在唱催眠曲？这个影响我的士气，也影响你的同学， 因为你的同学讲，哎呀，他也睡了，我也睡吧。这个你知道睡觉是会传染的啊。看着那个人睡觉，我也想睡了，我想大家都睡了啊。所以这个我的 advice 是说，假如你真的要困了，画个在笔记本上画图画，因为我也看不见你画的什么东西啊。你 only way is to keep you awake。OK， 那么比较 constructive 呢，就记笔记。就我乱讲的话，就把它记下来。你知道这个记笔记是有很多记法的，一个是记大要，另外一个是记 every action 啊。你记 every action 的话很有意思。我有一个朋友非常非常 smart， 我在美国读书的时候，他在那边 Johns Hopkins 做 residence， 一个医院里做 residence 啊。他台大医学院毕业的，这个人呢，完全不像医生，名师派的不得了。你去看他的笔记真有意思。他不大记这个老师讲什么，但是老师的每个动作他记下来。他这个老师在这里说打了个喷嚏，或者老师在这里擦了鼻涕，或者老师在这里这个结巴了一阵，你看，所以他这个笔记里面有老师教授上课每一个动作都有。所以你这个记笔记这样记的话，你就会抓住你的 attention， 你就不会去打瞌睡啊。因为我们讲的东西有的时候是不是那么有兴趣，不像那个讲故事啊，所以希望大家尽量不要在我的课堂里睡觉 ，OK？ 假如你们要困的话，我一定让你们出去睡，你可以出去睡，不要在这里睡 ，OK？ 好，谢谢大家。
我想问一下，就是那个无所沟呢？
不，好，另外一个啊，你坐下来。问问题一定要在课堂上问，下课问问题的扣分。因为什么？因为下课问问题是图利自己啊，上课问问题是有利所有的人，因为他这个牺牲非常大，因为他冒着危险问一个